Tonight's speaker is Dawson Church, who co-authored the book on soul medicine with Dr. Norman Shealy, who many of us know here, and he's going to be on Bernd Friedlander's panel at the Living Expo on anti-aging medicine. And the interesting thing about Dawson is he ties together the advances of electromagnetic medicine, including very advanced therapies such as the use of pulsed electromagnetic fields for depression, with phenomenally popular emerging therapies such as emotional freedom technique. And this is all done in a sound scientific framework. Rather than get into, he's worked with Larry Dossey, Bernie Siegel, Carolyn Mice, Gene Achtenberg, Gay Hendricks, Joan Borisenko, and many others, including Barry Sears and John Gray. He's also published a book that Bruce Lipton, who spoke here about a year and a half ago, authored on
The Biology of Belief.
Biology of Belief, which sold 100,000. How many copies?
About 130,000 copies.
That's pretty high for a spiritual book or something like that.
Yes.
And I think that's enough on this, and I give you Dawson Church.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me here. I appreciate that greatly. Thanks for the entertainment just earlier, too.
Microphone. Excuse me, would you like a microphone?
Whatever you like, if you need one. Often people are trying to turn me down rather than turn me up, so we'll see, we'll see how this goes.
Oh, it's on.
There we go. Good. Super. Good. At the moment, I'm really focused on research because for the last 30 years or so, 25 years, I've been working mostly in the publishing field. So I've worked for big publishers like Batten Dell, Random House, Simon & Schuster. I moved to New York, California in the late 80s, and at that time I was putting together a composition, an anthology called The Heart of the Healer, with Larry Dossey and Bernie Siegel and Carolyn Mace, many of those wonderful people who've now become some of the leading spokespeople in this field. And in the last 3 or 4 years, I've gradually been seduced from writing about the stuff to doing the stuff, doing the most exciting new things I can find. And now into researching it, because what I found was that a lot of these things are fairly easy to test in clinical trials. And I heard therapists and doctors and people in Kaiser and people treating veterans coming back from Iraq give me these wonderful accounts of the success they were having with some of these therapies. And I looked, though, at the research base, and it was that big. So I realized that to grow it, we needed to do more research, and this field is called energy psychology. So I've become very deeply involved in the last while. I'm on the board of the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, where I'm also the research director. And right now I'm involved in some way with about 14 randomized clinical trials in this field. And the results are amazing. The results are amazing. These are outcome studies. I had a fun opportunity recently to do something different with energy psychology. All these studies, and by the way, there'll be a huge review called Energy Psychology, a review of the scientific principles or something. Like, review the evidence, that's right, in the journal Psychotherapy next month. So there'll be a comprehensive review of all the studies done so far in a major peer-reviewed journal. But they're all the people with various conditions, like the Iraq veterans I'm studying. They have post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, and they're coming in not only with this psychological condition we call PTSD, which is the result of exposure to severe and prolonged emotional trauma, And they have complex PTSD, which means there wasn't just one big bad thing that happened. There were lots of big bad things that happened. When we began the study, we advertised for people with simple PTSD, which means one incident that occurred that really traumatized them. We couldn't find any. All the Iraq veterans had complex PTSD, multiple severe incidents that had happened. And not only, generally speaking, are these Iraq veterans having a series of big emotional traumas in their lives, but they're also, when we look at their physiology, and especially the balance between two hormones, which I'm sure you all know, cortisol and DHEA. And I haven't been here to Smart Life Forum before, but I'm sure that you've talked about DHEA and cortisol, and these are both produced by the adrenal gland. And if you look at the molecules, actually I should stop my PowerPoint presentation because after all I would prepare one. They're very similar. DHEA and cortisol, I'll put up some slides of them, look very, very similar to each other because they're both very similar molecules, very similar proteins. And we are either making lots of DHEA, which is the most common hormone in our bodies, and a crucial cell repair hormone, or we're using those same precursors to make lots and lots and lots and lots of cortisol. So if you get a shock, if you have a trauma, if you have an emotionally difficult event, you switch from making lots of DHEA to making lots of cortisol. Your cortisol level, as your cortisol level rises, your DHEA level drops, and vice versa. These Iraq veterans were coming in with chronically elevated cortisol and low DHEA, which correlates with cancer and all kinds of, virtually every major disease correlates with low DHEA, half or less of the recommended amounts in the body. And so all of the studies were done of these people with phobias and PTSD and depression and anxiety and various diseases. And I got an amazing call in September from the athletic department of Oregon State University. And they have a team called the Beavers. And these, I know nothing about American football and basketball stuff, but I designed a study. And my question was, okay, we know this stuff works amazingly well with people who are sick. What happens if we take healthy people, peak performers, and do energy psychology with these people? What will happen? Well, just to make a long story short, I went up there and did a very rigorous, randomized, controlled, clinical, double-blind trial with these athletes. And the treatment time required in these therapies is very brief. So cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the gold standard of therapy in many therapeutic settings like Kaiser right now, 12 sessions is regarded as a good start to therapy, 12 one-hour sessions of psychotherapy. With my Iraq vets, I'm treating them with 4 sessions of treating complex PTSD with only 4 one-hour sessions. With other studies, I'm using only 1 session of energy psychology with people to produce results. So almost as a joke, I told the therapists, these 2 distinguished sports therapists who are my therapeutic team for this Oregon State University trial, I gave them a quarter of an hour, 50 minutes, to produce an effect with these athletes. Now, it's not easy to produce any effect with anyone in a quarter-hour therapy session. And the results will be published later this year. The results were that we were testing 2 things. We were testing vertical jump height, how high these men and women can jump, and also how many free throws they can get in the basket. And a free throw is where they stand like a certain line in the court and have to pitch the ball in to the hoop. And the results were that the team that got the energy psychology intervention, the difference between that team and the ones that got placebo was 37% difference in free throws.
Wow.
In a rigorous trial. So these therapies turn out to not just be good for people with illnesses, but also valuable people who are already peak performers. So I talk about this in the book and how these things work. One of the main mechanisms that's being affected is your energy body. This is a machine at the University of Sheffield in England that does this whole body scan and produces a image of the electrical field of the body. And if you could imagine us all now, and you could see our electrical fields, we would look something like that. Not only would we look like that, but as I walk up to somebody over here, the field of my heart is affecting the field of this gentleman's heart over here from about 30 feet away. So our heart fields are tingling. Our brain's fields are tingling as we get closer. All of these fields affect each other as a healer lays hands in a therapeutic touch session on a client, a patient. Immediately, their hearts and their brain rhythms begin to entrain together. It's an amazing phenomenon. So we're affecting each other's bodies all the time. Someone says you have good energy, you have bad energy, you know. You can tell when you're with people, what is their energy like? And energy psychology simply ignores your history, your trauma, and it works on that level, and that's how it gets its results. This is based on 3 books. My first book, the first edition, was published 20 years ago, called Communing with the Spirit of Your Unborn Child, about using energy work with children in the womb. My book with Norm Shealy, Soul Medicine, is about the history of energy therapies historically, and then Gene in Your Genes looks at how these work epigenetically. We've had Bruce Lipton here, and he's told you, I'm sure, how epigenetics is the science of how genes are affected by influences from outside the cell, epigenetic effects. And for a long time, since Crick and Watson described the double helix structure of DNA in the 1950s and 60s, it's been assumed that there's this progression, DNA to RNA to something, which is protein. And they make proteins. Oh, by the way, these are my 3 kids. I'll show you a picture of them because I love them, and they're just a vital part of my life. And they're also my guinea pigs. My 5-year-old is with me half time, and the other day he said, I was cuddling with him, and he said, Daddy, will you do some energy psychology with me? So, and like my son had a test this morning. My older son, 19 years old, is in junior college. And this morning he called up and he was nervous. Now I know this stuff works on test anxiety. So we did a little bit of work with him on the phone and diminished his level of test anxiety. So I focused on how it works epigenetically. And another whole world I'm very hooked into is the application of these therapies, not just for us rich first world people, but these therapies are being used all over the third world as well, where there often are no hospitals, there may be 1 doctor for 30,000 people, or 400 villages. There are no modern medical facilities. They work just as well. This next photograph is one of women in a town called Sololá in Guatemala. Guatemala had a horrible 35-year civil war. The UN is still excavating mass graves in Guatemala. Many of these women have lost husbands, sons in the Civil War. But they can do energy work on themselves. I was so, when the earthquake happened in Peru a few months ago, one of my colleagues sent me photographs back of some of the people, again, long before the UN could be there or relief agencies were there, and there they were doing energy work on each other. That they could do. It's a human scale intervention. And I'm going to skip over the next few slides here. But the old idea, the old model is that DNA makes RNA, makes protein. And this theory is called the central dogma of molecular biology. That was the name of the seminal paper in the journal Nature, where Sir Francis Crick described it. DNA makes RNA, makes protein, never the other way around. So proteins, again, big complex molecules. We need, a gene is a length of DNA that has the instructions for how to make a protein. And we make about 100,000 proteins in our cells. And we need those instructions to make these all the time. And proteins look very different. There's a histamine, which, amongst other things, increases your heart rate, part of the stress response. Here is another protein. This is a growth hormone for cell repair. Here are other proteins, a neuropeptide, a beta blocker. All of these complex molecules, they all look very different from each other. We need those instructions to build these things. And epigenetics tells us how some of these things are being built by influences outside the cell. So I mentioned there are about 100,000 proteins that are coded by the genes. They are responsible not only for the functions of life, for your physiology, but also for your anatomy, like the microtubules that are like the girders that hold your cells up, hold your cells together, give them structure, rigidity. Those are proteins. So proteins are vital to all these life processes. Now, one peculiar little bit of jargon in this field is called gene expression. When we say a gene expresses, we mean that the gene then tells the cell to produce a certain protein. So the word expression, gene expression, is a critical word to be aware of the meaning of. And DNA is wrapped in a sleeve of protein, and what has to happen in order for that length of code to be read is for that tube has to unwrap, just like an architectural blueprint has to be unwrapped. You then would make working drawings, the RNA, and from those working drawings, the building, the protein, the cell body is built. So this process of unwrapping the DNA is of critical importance in life functions. And it turns out that DNA does not unwrap itself, that something happens to tell the cell to do that. And that's what's called an epigenetic effect. Some signal comes to the cell saying, make this protein. And this whole field has emerged in the last 10 years of studying what gives our cells those kinds of signals. There are two kinds of signals which I focus on. When we use the word environment in this field, we mean both the environment outside of our bodies and the environment inside of our bodies. For example, if someone were to run in through the door there and they were screaming, "There's been a big accident outside. Help!" You know, there are kids bleeding on the ground. All kinds of things would happen in our bodies. That person running through the door is an external signal. When I perceive them, my body is adept at turning the external signal into a series of biological messages. The internal environment. Now, why does it do this? Why is this crucial to life? Well, it's crucial to life because maybe today we could respond slowly to that and be there in 5 minutes and we would die. But guess what? My ancestors in some Welsh village 1,000 years ago, when the Vikings attacked, those who had an ability to very quickly translate those external signals, the Vikings are coming. If the internal mechanism, fight or flight, run away, grab a sword, do something, for God's sake, right now, the ones that did it right now lived, and those that were slow, the Vikings got them. They weeded out of the gene pool. And so that's how we translate things from the external environment into the internal environment. And I had an interesting talk show I did a few weeks ago on worry. And the talk show host said, "I've never, ever had anyone else tell me why we worry before." I said, "Well, it's obvious. Evolutionary biology has wired us to worry. Those of us on the steppes of Asia 10,000 years ago who scanned the environment for threats constantly. You know, where that tree, it's out of place, it's blooming early, maybe it's food. Or that tree's out of place, it's not really a tree, there's my enemy lurking behind it with the sword and the spear to kill me." Worry was a marvelously adaptive function. It helped us to worry. We think, we project, we think about possible threats. It helped us survive. Unfortunately, it's outlived its usefulness as a survival mechanism for us now, because what it does is it produces stress in our bodies And that stress has horrible effects because it raises cortisol and lowers DHEA. So the more we think about things, obsess about things, worry about things today, it's shortening our lives. Those telomeres are shortening more rapidly the more we worry and the more we produce a stress response in our body. One of the mechanisms that is much studied in epigenetics is that of what's called methylation and acetylization. Methylation and acetylization and other mechanisms either facilitate that gene expressing or inhibit the gene expressing. And so scientists and epigenetics has really gone off on this track of looking at what makes, what produces methylation, acetylization, and other things. And I'm sure Bruce Lipton showed you this slide. It's his favorite slide, one of my favorite slides. This is the agouti slide, famous slide from the journal Science, showing two mice that look very different. They only have one gene that's being expressed differently. They both have the gene. They both have the gene. Those mice are genetically identical. They both have the agouti gene, but in one it's been suppressed epigenetically and the other hasn't. The mouse on the left, mice with the agouti gene where it's expressed, have yellow coats. They have a higher incidence of cancer and diabetes, and they die early. But these things are all inhibited when the agouti gene is suppressed by methylation, the mouse on the right. So it was a shock to the world of biology and physiology when we realized that just epigenetically modifying one gene could have this huge effect. One of the things I was talking to a woman from, I was doing an interview with a magazine called HMO Executive earlier this week. And they were asking about gene tests. I'm saying, forget about the gene tests. Worry about the epigenetics of this because, for example, and I talked about epigenetics and she was very skeptical. They said, identical twins. These are people with identical genes. The cell splits when it's a single cell, and you have two babies born, twins are born, with exactly the same genes. But their health outcomes are often very, very different. I have a photograph in the book of two identical twin sisters in their 80s. One is driving to her bridge club in her Buick Cutlass Sierra, and very healthy and enjoying life as an active social life and social circle. The other identical twin sister has senile dementia, is crippled, and is in terrible condition mentally and physically. Identical genes. What happened? Epigenetics. Things happen to affect the genome and the expression and which genes got expressed. So these things are really important to your health. And by all means, pay attention to things like this lady over here. I know what your name is, Madam, the peach. I called you someone else, but you, yes, right. The voice of reason, I call her. I don't know what her name is, but I call you the voice of reason. And she was saying, tune into yourself. What do I need? There are all these supplements, all these conflicting ideas. But don't forget, you have an intuitive sense. You have a soul, you have a spirit, you have biological intelligence. Pick something up. How do you feel when you hold it? Just tune in, ask yourself these basic questions. If you have a cabinet full of supplements, just have some muscle testing on you, some psychotherapy with you. Just intuitively tune in. Stand there and pray. Ask the angels to show you which thing you should be using and which you should throw away or give away. So, and maybe you needed it. You needed that substance 5 years ago, or a year ago, or a month ago. Maybe not anymore. Who knows? We have this intuitive way, these intuitive knowings that when we start to integrate our soul, our spirit, our body, our mind, our heart, we have sources of power and wisdom that are inconceivable to us when we think of ourselves as small and weak and helpless. It's not what you take. It's who you are. It's the magic of the divine flowing through you that makes all the difference. It's epigenetic. Part of what it is its nurturing. One of the interesting studies has been of rats. Rats who are nurtured have a different health and life outcome than those rats who were not nurtured. When these researchers, Marty Seif was the researcher who did this, published this paper, the first paper on this, but they found that when groups of rat pups were nurtured by their mother, when their mother would herd them into the nest and lick them and rub up against them and love them, L-O-V-E, the most important word in science is love. She loved there was love in those little rats' experience. What happened was methylation and acetylization of their stress dampening genes occurred. So their ability to handle stress was much better. So they were less stressed. So again, their cortisol and DHEA levels reflected that. So nurturing love is an epigenetic intervention. Think about this. You are affecting your pattern of gene expression with every thought you think, and you cannot afford one negative thought. Not one. So that's your homework assignment. You are not allowed henceforth for your whole life to have even one more negative thought. Because it's hurting you. It's affecting your physiology. With these Iraq veterans, again, you see that these things are in inverse proportion. Trauma kills. The best science on this subject is a study, and if you don't know about this, in fact, you should get these guys to speak here, because some of them are local. Does anyone know about the ACE study, ACE study? Okay, this is a fundamental study. It had 17,400 participants. That's a big study, done by the National Institutes of Health and by Kaiser Permanente. They looked at the correlation between unresolved emotional trauma and health outcomes. And guess what? They found that people with unresolved childhood trauma have higher incidence of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, depression, bone fractures. People who had high incidences of adverse childhood experiences, emotional trauma in their childhood, were 3 times as likely to smoke, were 30 times as likely to attempt suicide. It's dawned on our society at long last that there is this enormously strong connection between unresolved emotional trauma, that negative thought you're carrying around, that negative feeling you're carrying around, and your health outcome. That's why some of these twins live to advanced old ages in health, and others are decrepit, because epigenetically they're affecting themselves by these external environments, which again translate themselves very rapidly into the internal environment. Those signals can be an actual event. I love this photograph of nurturing. And I mentioned the Vikings earlier, the object of stress. That's an object of threat, something really happening out there. But it also can be a subjective perception, something happening just inside your head. Your body converts either of these things into a signal, molecular signal, which translates itself into the cellular environment as well. And even very, very brief experiences of trauma can have effects throughout the body. The other thing that's happened, I'm sure you've all heard about brain plasticity and the amazing work that's happened in this field in the last few years. The old, when I was in high school in the 1970s, and the beautiful biology textbook picture of the brain showing it as this, it grows for the first 17 years or so, then it stops and it just looks like this, and then a neuron looks like this. Our brains are on the boil. These big, huge protein molecules are being ripped apart and put back together again. Even the girders of your cells, those central girders of your cells in parts of the brain, are being broken down and reconstituted in as little as 10 minutes. Your brain is changing with every thought you think, every feeling you have, so for God's sake, put good things in there. Because if you stew and resent and have anger in your heart, you are hurting yourself far worse every moment you do that than you can possibly believe. So these things are being formed, these neural pathways. A physician called Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in the year 2000. And he showed that synaptic connections don't take weeks, months, years to form. Within 1 hour of a repeat stimulus, they can double. The number of synapses in a neural bundle can double. And then if you don't use them, stop thinking that thought, stop eating that thing, stop having that stimulus, they decay in 2 weeks or thereabouts. So you are literally doing neural patterning in your brain, in your nervous system, with every thought you think, every feeling you have every day. Whether you meditate, whether you pray, what you believe, who you associate with, these things are having, whether you nurture yourself. Maybe you don't want someone to love you, but for God's sake, love yourself. Nurture yourself. Wake up in the morning, just enjoy being in a body. That's a good start, Start the day that way. Meditation. I have a physician friend, he said to me, Dawson, if meditation was a pill, it would be malpractice to not prescribe it. So meditate. And then energy psychology, of course, which we'll get to in a minute, is a very, very powerful thing too. Again, this class of genes, which I focus on in the book, is called the immediate early genes because they click on very fast within 2 or 3 or 4 seconds, actually even 1 second of a stimulus. And again, we needed this to survive in years gone by. We don't need it so much now. So that stress response, again, very, very useful in years gone by. Bad now, because here are the long-term effects of high cortisol in your body. And I made this slide to shock you. It's a long list. It's actually much longer than this. Every one of these, by the way, nothing here is not substantiated by a paper in a major peer-reviewed journal. Nothing I'm saying is blue sky. It's all well demonstrated. All these are some of the effects of chronic cortisol, chronic stress, which again, we can produce with our hearts, our thoughts, our feelings. Dr. Galvin asked me on the way over here how long it takes for this process to occur. And one of the real tragedies of research is that I called up several labs and scientists and colleagues and said, I asked that question, how long does it take for us to actually tear apart these big cortisol molecules and make DHEA? Nobody knows. Nobody has any tests for it. You search PubMed, there's nothing. The whole research apparatus in America and in England, for the most part, is totally geared toward pathology, disease. I can't, to find a lab that would even measure telomeres, took my colleague Norm Sheely years to find. There's one lab we found now that will measure telomere length for an experiment that we want to do. But you want a test for those stress genes. There's no test for those stress genes. Now you can find a test for defective genes or pathology genes. You can't find a test for these things. But anyway, we think that within about, the best answer I have so far is 5 to 10 minutes that we're shifting from breaking down these molecules and remaking that cortisol as DHEA or vice versa. I'm actually doing a little research study right now where I'm measuring cortisol and DHEA every quarter of an hour of the intervention to see what the time frame is. We sort of invent these research studies as we go along because no one has the answers or the equipment so far. So you, by what you put in that round circle above that head, are determining whether you are shifting your production of all of your precursors to make cortisol or DHEA, and any one of those 100,000 other proteins. Wound healing studies. This is a study of couples who had fights. Elizabeth Kikold Glaser and Richard Glaser, her husband, at Ohio State University. And I won't describe the methodology in detail, but they found that those couples who were asked to remember a fight in a brief intervention had a suppression of their immune system. They weren't actually having a fight, they were just remembering a fight. Just the memory of a fight. Now, some couples, you ask them to remember a fight, you know what happens. They're in one very quickly, and some of the couples were like that. They quickly developed name calling and raising their voices and so on, those couples had up to a 40% suppression of their immune system. Again, stress has an epigenetic effect. Nurturing and the lack of nurturing has an effect. So right now I'm working on some, I'm designing an experiment with the University of Miami Behavioral Sciences Department on measuring the genetic effects of energy psychology using things called gene chips. Again, there's a lot more on all this in the book. That one of the therapeutic issues and frustrations that, if any of you are art therapists, I know you run across this, is people revert to type. In fact, just doing a little experiment with you right now. Take your arms and cross them. Okay. Notice which arm is on top. Just see which arm is on top, okay? Now reverse your arms. Now half of you are just doing this, you know, it's like you always cross your arms a certain way. Put your arms out like this, cross your thumbs, okay? Now the thumb you put on top is the thumb you always put on top. If you reverse them, you'll feel weird. You don't do that normally. Our bodies are the same way. Our levels of cortisol and DHEA are set. We're used to them. And one lab director told me, you cannot change those levels short of a direct injection of DHEA to those subjects, the Iraq vets. You cannot change those levels in less than 3 months. They're very, very, very stable. Biochemically, we are stable inside as this. And that means that if we're used to a chaotic internal biochemistry, we tend to recreate it. You all know people who create, tragedy in their work lives, or pick horrible people to be friends with, or get married to, or whatever. And so, finally, they dump the horrible, abusive person they've got involved with, and they get involved with somebody else, and guess what? Somebody else is just like the other person, probably worse, because what they're doing is they have a set point at which their internal biochemistry is comfortable. And if they don't have that set point met, they might think, oh, this person's boring. Sure, they are recreating all this chaos in my hormone levels. So, we're very, very used to these stress set points. And if you had a high stress set point as a child, maybe you came from an alcoholic or a violent or an abusive household when you were a little kid, and it really served you to have high cortisol and be on high alert all the time, because God knows when Dad's going to fly into a rage and clobber you, or Mom's going to start weeping and throwing things around the house. So that high cortisol was really useful to you right then, but it's killing you today. It's no good for you anymore. You don't need, but you got stuck there. So you tend to recreate life situations. So people go to therapy and spend. I knew a guy in New York. He said, "I've been in Freudian therapy for 14 years." Well, it's true, he had. He could describe his problems very well. He could not do a damn thing about changing himself, which is, the ultimate goal. So we're very, very, very stable and we're very set. And energy psychology is one of the very few things that I run across that will change those set points and give people a new experience of what it likes to feel a more balanced and healthy internal biochemistry. So let's just cover some of the things that qualify as epigenetic interventions. And again, there's a study behind each of these things which I quote in the book. So this is the last word on this, but spirituality, nurturing, belief, energy medicine, visualization, heart coherence, attitude, prayer, meditation, altruism. I got a call from a woman today who had a very sad story with her son with a genetic defect, her little boy. And she said, Dr. Church, are there any studies running at Soul Medicine Institute that I can get involved with and try to help my son? I said, there aren't. And I don't know that you can change that defect. But guess what? Prayer, attitude, love, nurturing, belief, meditation, love yourself. Just be still and calm and kind to yourself to start with. that is a great gift you can offer your son. So all of these things, altruism, just witnessing an altruistic act being done by somebody else raises your immune factors. So these things are all parts of consciousness. I call these things consciousness-based interventions. And these are all ways in which, for free, for almost nothing, for a few minutes of your time, you use your consciousness and you're having these effects in your body. Beliefs affect cells. This same researcher I mentioned earlier at the University of Miami, a belief in whether God is a punishing God or a loving God. Now, unfortunately, other studies show that most Americans believe in a punishing God, and very few believe in a God of infinite love. That having a belief in a punishing God correlates strongly in these HIV patients in their studies with a drop in their white blood cell count. Not a 10% drop. So again, two groups of patients. One of them believes in a loving God. They all have HIV. One believes in a punishing God. The group that believed in a punishing God had twice the rate of white blood cell decline as the group that believed in a loving God. So just think about that. You are able, with one belief, I mean, she said to me, Dawson, when I read my research, I could not believe myself when she got the numbers back. It was so staggering to her that a single belief correlated so strongly with an effect in these patients of hers. Energy is epigenetic. Conditions show up in that beautiful energy body before they show up in the physical body. And the work, of course, of Harold Saxton Burr, first at Harvard, then at Yale in the 30s and 50s, just remarkable results in this regard. Also, Robert Becker, the bone healing studies, where he showed that if you pass a small amount of electrical energy through a bone, it'll heal faster. And of course, being the fallacy of scale, he thought, well, if you pass more energy through, it'll heal even faster. Wrong. We're sensitive to these tiny little fields. We turn out to not actually be very sensitive to some of the much larger fields that are around us every day. But these small fields, you close your hand, and you close your eyes, and just have your hands near each other, and you can feel the field there. There's a field. You're feeling that electrical field of your own body. So one of the concepts I develop in this book is what I call the epigenetic health cycle. It's a virtuous cycle. Now, it's also a destructive cycle if you change the stuff in the head to be destructive. But if you're focusing on your beliefs, and the moment you have a belief, or you see a belief, like I used to say, I'm bad at math. Now, I had some objective experience being bad at math at school, because the teacher divided kids into those who were good, medium, and bad at math. So the good ones were in the front of the class, medium ones were in the middle of the class, and the bad ones were in the back of the class. And actually, where I was at a separate group in the very, very, very back. I didn't qualify to be one of the bad ones. If you hear yourself saying something like, I'm not good enough, or I can't have that thing, or I don't deserve it, that's a belief. It's just a belief. It's just a story you made up somehow. It's been entrenched in there. Change it. Change it immediately. Be rigorous with your language. Be rigorous with your thinking. Don't let yourself ever think anything. My kids will sometimes say to me, oh, Daddy, I'm no good at this. I'd say, don't you dare say that about my child. So I just want them to think anything bad about themselves. So belief is vital. Nurturing, I mentioned earlier, energy medicine, visualization, spirituality, meditation. Energy psychology, by the way, is a method for rapidly shifting that stress response. But meditation, I think, is a baseline. Do it every morning, even for a few minutes, and it sets you up to have a peaceful day. So you do all these things, and we know now that they have this effect of methylation, which inhibits gene expression, or acetylization, which facilitates the popping open of that protein sheath. And then if you have that epigenetic signal going to the cells being affected, it modulates gene expression, and either if you're thinking good things and good thoughts and having good experiences and experiences of nurturing, you are making lots of DHEA and you're tearing apart those cortisol molecules to make it with, or you're doing the opposite. And this then, of course, you feel better if you're doing that kind of positive intervention in yourself. If you're doing good things and kind things and loving things and surrounding yourself in an environment, an internal environment and an external environment that nourishes you, so you feel better, so you're then encouraged to do more of it. And you start to feel better and better and better and better. I was at an energy psychology conference last year, and I was talking to one of the board members of the Energy Psychology Association board, and she said, "Oh, by the way, I'm celebrating my 60th birthday today." And I was astounded because she looked about 45. And I said, "Wow." And so she said, "Well, how old do you suppose?" She had been pointing out other board members to me. She said, "How old is Dorothea Hover-Kramer?" She's the author of a big book on therapeutic touch. I said, "Dorothea's in her mid-40s, maybe late 40s." She said, "Dorothea is 69. How old is Larry?" She had to point people out to me. It's like, my goodness, all these people are a lot older than I thought they were just by the way they look. So if you clean, the correlation is if you clean up your act in your environment, good things happen in your body and good things happen with aging. One of the touching things, I don't have time to do this tonight, unfortunately, but I was at a conference last February, and one of the studies I've done is on people with frozen shoulders. And so we recruit people for, again, a randomized, blind, controlled study who have frozen shoulders. And so they come in and we measure their shoulder movement. We measure it in this direction. 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 And we measure it in this direction. Those are 5 different planes of shoulder measurement. So when they walk into the clinic, we take a history from them. We measure their shoulders with a device called a goniometer, which measures the degree of motion to the nearest degree. We also do a psychological questionnaire to see how happy and unhappy they are, how much pain they have, and so on. We then give them a 1/2 hour, 30-minute energy psychology treatment, incredibly brief, or placebo treatment, which also is effective. They are getting remarkable results. And some of these people have had frozen shoulders for decades, 10, 20, 30 years. And they're getting remarkable results. I had one woman at a conference, and I asked for a volunteer in a group like this. There are about 200 people in the room. And I asked for a volunteer, and this woman walked up, and she kind of hobbled up, because her left side of her body was kind of frozen. And she only moved her left shoulder maybe a few inches forward and a few inches to the side. Her shoulder was almost completely frozen. And again, energy psychology looks at the emotional trauma underlying physical disease. So I asked her what emotional trauma she'd had in her life lately. She told me that her son her adult son, had been a peace worker in a third world country and been kidnapped by guerrillas and held by his kidnappers for several months. And then they killed him. So, emotional trauma, physical limitation, and she then said it's the 7th anniversary of his death. And it was a horrible story. But anyway, as she was talking to me, I decided to work on one part of that traumatic incident. And that is that the State Department called her to tell her his body had been found 7 years ago. So we worked on the phone call, because I intuitively felt the phone call was probably, I asked her, was the phone call from the State Department a big traumatic event within that series of traumas? And she said, I knew already in my heart he was dead. Yeah. But I thought, even so, her left brain was then hearing from the State Department, so I worked on that with her. I worked on her for maybe 2 minutes, and her shoulder just totally freed up. In fact, she was standing there looking at her arm like it belonged to somebody else. She was waving her arm around. Afterwards, in the hallway, she just came up to me and she said, I can't believe this. She was waving her arm round and round and round. She hadn't use of it for 7 years. When you tackle, we know from this huge 17,000 person ACE study at Kaiser that emotional trauma correlates with physical disease. What my studies are doing is they're showing the flip side of that, the other end of the bookmark. What happens if you release emotional trauma? Well, guess what? Physical disease shifts as well. Just like the basketball players at Oregon State University who jumped 37% higher. And the shoulder study people, I'm just finishing data gathering now for a shoulder study, a formal large shoulder study, and again showing big results. I'm about to start reporting on the results of the Iraq veterans. After just a few treatments with energy psychology, their cortisol levels are way down, they're normalized, their DHA levels are way up, their heart rate variability, if you know what that is, has come into increased coherence. They're scoring way better, pretty much normal on psychological evaluations. They sleep better, because one thing that cortisol does is, if you have a flashback, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, your cortisol level spikes, you disrupt that cortisol cycle, and you can't sleep as well during the night. So the sleep normalizes, all kinds of good things happen. So again, this enormous link, this epigenetic health cycle. You do more of it, you feel better, you want to do more of it, you feel better still, and eventually you find yourself living an absolutely fabulous, healthy life. And a lot of it has happened just because you took control of what happened inside your head. So I mentioned some of the current studies we're doing. One I proposed, which is still a long way from being designed and funded, is called the MAC study, Mitigating the Effects of Adverse Childhood Experiences. The VET study, I also have a database online where I collect case histories from psychotherapists, from psychiatrists, from doctors, from nurses, and put them through a formal screening process. It's called the Energy Psychology Clinical Case History Database. It's free, it's accessible on the web. You can go there and look at people who have one case. This one over here is a migraine sufferer, and this history was taken 7 years after this young Hispanic man in New York had his last migraine. He had migraines repeatedly. He had one treatment, again focusing on the underlying emotional trauma, and his migraine shifted. So there are stories there of people with cancer, with MS, all kinds of conditions who got better when, rather than focusing on the external aspects of the disease, they began to release all those emotional traumas that were holding them back. So in future, I'm predicting that medicine will increasingly focus on consciousness, because it's free, it's available, it's entirely under your control. What is in your head and your heart is entirely up to you. If you feel angry with somebody, didn't Benjamin Franklin say take 10 deep breaths? Was it Thomas Jefferson? You know, just a simple. And he said if you're very angry, take 100. Don't say that thing. I had one young man say to me, Dawson, I'm in my men's group. He said, Dawson, this woman I'm with, blah 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 blah. How do I know whether it's her or whether it's me? I'm sure you've all asked this question in a relationship. If you've been married or in a relationship, you get upset, you get trouble, you feel this thing, you get angry, you get triggered in some way, you get upset. Is this person making you upset, or are you making yourself upset? Here is a test. If it's happened before, it's you. If you've ever felt that way before, it's you. It's an old biochemical reaction with which you are very familiar. So maybe the site of the argument has changed, but you know you felt that way before. That's you. It's been triggered by this other person, but they're not causing it. They're just triggering it. And after a while, when you get to be emotionally healthy, someone triggers you, you say, thank you. I'm getting triggered. I have just had an emotional wound from my childhood. An old biological pattern surfaced. Come to my awareness so now my consciousness can work on it. Thank you. Thank you for triggering me. And now, at first, probably you won't say that because you're being triggered all the time. But after you've cleaned up a chunk of your life, is not really appreciate people who trigger you, because it gives you access to the further reaches, the deeper levels of healing you otherwise may not have. So I call this the primacy of consciousness. And my model that I teach and focus on and try and train, I'm training as many people as I possibly can in this field, is consciousness, DNA, RNA, protein. And of course, we live in the sea of consciousness. We live in this huge field. We have our little fields, our own biological fields. Everything living has a biofield. But we live in an enormous field, and we are having field effects far beyond what we can imagine. Why does distant healing work? Why does distant prayer work? There's something in energy psychology called surrogate work, where you work for somebody who's a long way away. Now, I cannot tell you scientifically how that works. It's a big puzzle to me. In fact, that chapter, Gene in Your Genes, I held off writing it for a long time, so I just, how do you deal with all this stuff? But somehow it does work, because it's consciousness. Shift consciousness, and suddenly biology will shift as well. Finally, I want to mention the link and the potential of this work for changing society, because when you change society, when you change yourself, you change society. When you choose not to say that unkind word, when someone cuts you off the freeway and you choose not to flip them off, or say something aggressive or violent, even in your own head, you know what I say when someone cuts me off? Bless you. I love you. This is a human being with a beautiful energy field. Maybe they're upset, maybe they're distraught. Just love them. Haven't you ever been a jerk sometimes yourself? Haven't you said something insensitive yourself? Just be tolerant, just be patient with people. And this affects societies, because guess what? When a generation of kids is raised the way Prussian children were raised, in the 1870s after the Franco-Prussian War, where they're beaten repeatedly, they make great soldiers and they make great wars. But when they're nurtured, when they're raised, when they're bathed in love every day, whole groups of societies can change very, very, very quickly. So this is what I call the epigenetic social cycle. Whole societies and civilizations can change. Their genes can shift because of the consciousness of a few people. And imagine, I don't know how many people here tonight, 100 or something, if each person here, for the next few days, goes out and every urge you have to be mean or short or impatient or nasty, any old thing you feel that you want to just dump on someone around you, just don't do it. Just say bless you. That gentleman in the back, you had your hand raised earlier, yes.
You had a comment about HIV patients
Yes.
with disparate outcomes.
Yes.
My question was, is that comment about optimistic patients and not optimistic patients? You mentioned that was a correlation. My question is it causal? If it's just a correlation, it's a much weaker case.
Yeah, I don't know. What happens in these sorts of studies, in these big funded studies, is you track the data and you note correlations. Now, if I let go of my water glass 100 times and it falls to the floor every time, it's strong correlation. That's all I can say, and that's all you can say when you publish a study. So scientists are very wary to claim causation of things. So even in this massive 17,000 person Kaiser ACE study, all they will talk about is correlation, not causation. Yeah?
To the mice for just a second. You have a golden mouse and a brown mouse. And essentially, the difference is the suppression of a gene or
Expression of a gene, yes.
Yes. So conversely, given the golden mouse, could you actually suppress that gene or express it, and then that mouse would slim down and turn brown? Can these be on and off pretty?
Some are turned on and are always on or on permanently. I mean, I'm 6'5.5". I'm not going to grow to 6'9". I'm not going to probably shrink to 5'2". So some like that are like that, and the number that are like that you know, the geneticists tell me like 15% are sort of that order. The other 85% are engaged in conjunction signals with the environment. And the immediate early genes are engaged very, very quickly and affect many, many different things. The early genes are the ones that are responsible for that stress response. So they're all and that happens very quickly. Like, you know, maybe I'm stressed because there's a noise outside. I think that my genes shift very slightly. Maybe I feel loving and calm, and they shift. So that dance is happening every moment in our bodies. Our cells undergo about 100,000 biochemical processes a second, and a lot of those are mediated by these immediate early genes. So there are categories of genes that are late genes or intermediate genes that act in different time frames, but the early genes, they are popping on and off all the time based on the stress response.
So I guess the question is then, is their effect long-term and not reversible?
Oh no, you're changing every moment.
No, I mean like particularly in terms of the pathology of the mice, for example. When you have something that's pathological like that, is that gene able to be completely reverted? Can you get it to go back the way it could be or should be to be healthier?
The studies I can talk about definitively are the rat studies. And what they did was they took nurtured mice who have these acetyl groups that facilitate the expression of stress genes. Are you with me thus far?
Yeah.
And they injected metals into the hippocampus of the brain, direct injection. And those mouse became fearful and lost their stress dampening abilities. They also took mice that had been neglected as pups and had a lot of fear. Actually, you know, what they call them, the ones that have a good ability to handle stress, they call them well-adjusted mice. I don't know why they call them that. And well-adjusted mice, I'm thinking, God, has mouse been through psychotherapy, something like that. So the well-adjusted mice, you know, so they take the fearful ones, and then by injecting those substances directly into the hippocampus, they have that effect. And then the opposite effect for the ones that are fearful, they inject them with those acetyl groups that facilitate the expression of the stress dampening genes and become less fearful, better adjusted. So yes, this has direct, so you can do it with an injection into the hippocampus of the brain, or you can do it by loving touch. Take your pick. Yes?
Is the term energy psychology, does that refer to some specific modality, or is that a generic term for all the things on that list, like medicine?
No, it's a specific term for group of therapies. The best known as emotional reading techniques, or EFT. How many of you have heard of EFT or been exposed to EFT? What EFT is it's essentially EFT is simply based on the observation that when people are under stress, if someone says a piece of shocking news, I'll go, you know, people gasp and they now where touching there turns out to be an acupressure point right up here. It's called K27. When someone gets a bad piece of news and goes like this, they're touching actually two meridians right over here with these two fingers over here. When you get depressed and put your hand like this, you're touching two meridian endpoints right over here. And energy psychology is simply, EFT is based on the observation that there are 11 of these points, and if you just recall a trauma and get really upset, you feel upset thinking about what Sally said to me the other day, or what my mother said to me when I was 4, whatever. So I have my trauma. Then you just tap or rub all these 11 points. That sense of emotional charge around the incident goes away. So you still recall the incident, but the emotional charge goes away, and the stress dampening effect comes into place. So this is EFT is the best known one. There are millions of people who use EFT. It's being studied in Britain's National Health Service as an intervention. Kaiser is studying it. You know, it's about to burst onto the scene as a major therapeutic advance. Again, it's free, it's easy, it takes about 5 minutes to learn it. And it's in the back of the book. One of the ironies of the book is, you know, there's 300 pages of scientific studies and evidence and mechanisms, but the EFT routine is 1 page in the back. So these mechanisms are complex, but the actual how to do it is just one little page. Also, there's one wonderful section here, which I reprinted by permission of my great friends, Donna Eden, who wrote the book Energy Medicine, and her husband, David Feinstein. And it's called the 5-minute energy routine. And I guarantee you, if you do this in the morning when you wake up, whenever you feel stressed, it takes 5 minutes, it's mechanically tapping or rubbing or moving parts of your body, you will feel a dramatic surge in energy. Your energy will stabilize and change. You'll feel calmer, but dramatically more energized. So get a very, very quick little series of taps and thumps and movements and, cross crawl and so on, but you feel a lot better after you've done it. So the book's full of this. Also, I'm also the publisher of Energy Psychology Press, and I bought a few. It's a new publishing company. There are a few books that have shipped in the last month. The Energy of Belief is one. It's got another therapy called Touch and Breathe, which uses the same 11 points. The Human Antenna, which talks about the ways in which those microtubules actually are receiving signals and transmitting signals from the universal field in our bodies. So there's a selection of books from the press, as well as one of the anthologies I've edited over the last while. So there aren't many, there's only one copy of Dreaming Your Dreams left, but there are a bunch of, some of it's in here as well. So, and there's a guy in the very back there with a question. That gentleman,
well,
yeah.
I'm just wondering what the treatments, like you said, what we treated in the
Oh.
15 minutes. What is that? Is that like tapping?
We use EFT. Yeah, we use EFT. We're having them recall an incident, and then with a shoulder study, we're having them, we're working on the physical limitation. They can't move their shoulder more than this far. We're working on the emotional trauma that underlies that. So I asked the athlete, why can't he jump any higher? And he says, I'm worried about a test I'm going to take tomorrow. See emotional trauma there. And then for the shoulder study, you treat the protective function of the limited range of motion. Because the person knows if they raise their shoulder that far, it's going to hurt like hell. So they raise this far and only this far. So they have been healed 10 years ago. And that protective function might have still kept them raising their arm any further. So it's only when you release that third thing, so we're treating those three things with EFT in a very brief routine. And in fact, we're doing another phase of it, and if anyone actually has a frozen shoulder, I'll be out of the country, but the therapist doing this will enroll people subject to meeting some criteria. So if anyone has a frozen shoulder, that is open for recruitment, like for the next week. So, yeah.
And if someone's a torticollis, is it the same thing?
What's that?
Torticollis the same as a frozen?
I can't quite hear you, I'm afraid.
Is torticollis the definition?
We're not treating it. We're only doing frozen shoulder or limited range of motion in the shoulder. So that the pain is not an inclusion criterion. So if you have just pain, it doesn't count for the study. But if you literally can't raise your arm above a certain level in one of those 5 planes of motion, then you're eligible for that study. Yes.
How is epigenetics involved in the gestation of a baby, that is, getting all the parts made and put together in the right sequence?
Yeah. If I could answer that, I'd get a Nobel Prize. But there's a wonderful institution called the Santa Barbara Graduate Institute, which is studying some of those questions. And Wendy McCarthy is a colleague of mine who works down there, and she and her colleagues are studying some of the epigenetic effects of EFT and of changes of consciousness of children in the womb. But again, that energy field I showed you in the very first slide, we know that if your child is bathed in love, that is going to shift the energy field in which it's growing up, in which its cells are being formed. And I have to believe that that's having some effect. Actually plotting what those effects are, again, this is such a new field where we're way too early to tell that with any degree of precision. But we know that all of these effects of consciousness are having some effect on the kids. Even if you, for example, have a child who's acting out and you calm yourself, it can have a calming effect on the child. It can certainly help you know more about them. Like when I worked with this woman with the frozen shoulder, and I then had her tell a story again about getting the phone call from the State Department. She then said, that young man in the State Department who called me and told me my son's body had been found, he didn't do a very good job. He was feeling very awkward. I can tell. I feel for him. So she was able to look beyond her own pain to the pain of another person. And that's what can happen. So if you're a parent, for goodness sakes, if you're triggered, don't do a thing with or to your children until you first release your own triggering. I can tell with my kids, when I'm triggered and I want to just, it's me. I've had a feeling before. Not them. They're just the trigger. I'm the explosive, so I deal with my own explosiveness first. Then, once I've diffused it, I can then offer something intelligent to my kids. So in the womb, I just intuitively, I think it's likely that if there's a calm energy environment, that all kinds of biological effects occur. And I'm sure we'll chart those over the course of the next couple of decades scientifically as well. Yes?
What's the relationship, you think, between your conscious status, the status of your conscious wakefulness, and electromagnetic fields? Is there any kind of tight correlation, or do you think they're the same thing, or what do you think about it?
Here is one interesting correlation that my friend Roland McCraty, who's the chief scientist at the HeartMath Institute, has noted. They did a series of studies, and what they did was they wanted to determine what the lag was between an image registering on the brain, the visual cortex, and a heart change. So you have a traumatic experience, and your heart starts pounding, or you're with a really kind, loving person, and your heart rate slows down. Those histamines are shifting. So they hooked up a group of subjects, again this is a rigorous study reported in a major peer-reviewed journal, to an EEG, an EKG, and a random number generator that threw images, 45 images on a screen. So the subject sat in front of a computer screen, then an EEG on, an EKG to their heart, and they measured the screen threw up at random either an image, a violent image that would raise the heart rate, or a peaceful image that would lower it. And they had these subjects hooked up this way. They found that the heart responded to the image before the brain did. The heart responded to the image before it even hit the visual cortex. And they both responded before the computer selected at random one of the 45 images and flashed it on the screen. The heart responded, the brain responded, and then the computer responded. So, consciousness is a huge subject, and it's a sea of consciousness. It's affecting our bodies. We're affecting it, and the links between them scientifically are. We're starting to devise experiments like this. We haven't even been asking the right questions about consciousness scientifically for the last generation. Now we're starting to stumble into some of these effects and finding that they have, Prozac and that whole class of SSRI drugs. If you look at the numbers, they're about 7% over a placebo. So a placebo has like 31% effect on depression, anxiety, and an SSRI has maybe 37%, 38% effect on those things. Epigenetically, we know that these therapies have much, much, much larger effects than 3% or 7%, like the white blood cell one I mentioned, where there was a 300% effect on the white blood cell count. So the effect, as we're asking the right questions, we're finding that there are huge effects from things like belief and consciousness on our bodies and on our immune systems. Big effects. One of my great colleagues says the drug companies are dead. They don't realize it yet, they're all dead. Yeah. Yes.
Does any of this have any application to what we hear about this epidemic of childhood asthma?
I don't know enough about that to even comment on it. Unfortunately, I just don't know. So I know there are lots of case histories of asthma being treated with this, but that's all I can say. Yeah. Yes.
A follow-up on Phil's question about electromagnetic fields. I had frozen shoulder for a while, and it was cured by a machine which was called an acuscope. It was an electromagnetic thing that had a digital readout on it, and I had a couple of sessions, and it was cured. And I had this for a long time. I couldn't even brush my teeth, and so presumably, obviously there were emotional factors involved, but this was a physical injury, as it were, and the electromagnetic field somehow or other was broken up by this machine. And I understand the 49ers, John Taylor used it on his knees, and Joe Montana on his elbow, and Joan Benoit Samuelson had used the same machine on her arthroscopic surgery before she qualified for the 1984 Olympics. And apparently the machine is kind of the predecessor, precursor, as it were, of the TENS, the electrical stimulation and so forth. And I wondered if that magnetic field
yes, just changing the field does change you whether you use. In fact, one interesting series of experiments by a researcher called James Joy compared the emanations, electrical emanations from the fields, the hands of healers, those fields, with some things like the TENS machines, and found they operated at similar frequencies. So it's interesting that however you change the field, there are biological effects. However, what I would say is, if I were in that position, I would use the therapy, but I'd also say, well, what are the emotional issues below it? And maybe there are none, maybe you can't get to them, maybe you can heal them, but it never hurts just to look at every experience to see what meaning you can get from it. Yeah.
I'd like to support that with a couple stories. At dinner tonight we were talking about electromagnetic fields, and I've written articles for magazines on that subject. And then anecdotally over the years I've used my ELF meters to measure various conditions in people's homes. In one case, a good friend of mine who was joyful, cherubic, in his 50s kind of guy, sung music and danced and just was a wonderful person. He and his wife lived in the same place for 25 years. He fell into severe depression. Now, after 2 years, he let me know that he'd been on all these SSRIs and so forth, and he said, I don't know what happened. He said, but my father's a doctor. He said, I get on these drugs, but I'm becoming suicidal, he said. Would you come and measure my house? So I went to his house and went across. I said, where do you spend most of your time? He says, in bed. I'm usually gone during the day. So I went across the bed. I said, which side do you sleep on? And I said, over here, right? He said, yes. I said, can I pull back your pillow? Pull back the pillow. Right behind his head was a transformer for his answering machine. So I dramatically took it out, threw it on the floor, saw the guy a month later, and he gave me a big bear hug and lifted me off the ground and said, the first good night's sleep in 2 years, I'm off all the drugs. He says, I'm back to normal, Jim, thank you.
Yes, yeah.
So that's how electromagnetic fields can affect you. So I encourage people, if they're at their computers or whatever, try to keep the power supplies at least 2 feet away, because it can actually cause DNA damage and erratic behavior in cats, which is one where I couldn't figure it out. The 2-year-old cat was fine, happy. They bought one of these new things to sleep in, and it started tearing up the curtains, ripping the couch, digging out all the potted plants. And I said, will you come over, Jim? And it was a 10-year-old condo. I said, I can't imagine. I said, there's just a light switch there where you set this thing. And then I measured this big field, so I took off the light switch and nothing. I went, I don't know, but I smell coffee. You mind if I have a little cup? Went around the corner from the dining room into the kitchen, and there's 2 big fat transformers right behind on the other side of the wall from where the cat was. So they said, let me try an experiment. So I grabbed the little cat stand and put it over in the other corner of the dining room, and immediately the cat came racing over, jumped on top, curled up into a little ball, and fell asleep, and they said it was the last of the bad behavior.
Yeah, also, I mentioned that there are updating devices. You mentioned TENS machines, which are fabulous. Norm Sheedy has his Sheedy TENS. Also, PEMS machines, pulsed electromagnets at various frequencies. These have been shown in a lot of ways to help depression. Again, while I think that artificially influencing the field can be very useful, I think it's also important to look at the emotional factors below it as well. So do both. Yes?
What is your experience with low-level laser therapy?
Low-level laser therapy?
Yes.
Again, that's a subject I know nothing about. I'm sorry. It's not out of my field. One thing you always do is, if you just do a search, either search PubMed for articles. Also, Google Scholar is great. So scholar.google.com, it retrieves information about all these databases.
Now, to follow up on that, I looked into it recently, and I talked to my sister in Czech Republic, and they used it 6 years ago to treat her back problems. And
You know, the other
very
thing, though,
successfully.
someone mentioned statins earlier. Now, of course, all this evidence for statins is certainly that they have potentially harmful side effects. And you know, there's a drug cycle. That there's this new drug that's touted, and there are studies out there, and people start using it, prescribing it, and it's prescribed off-label, and suddenly it's a huge phenomenon. And then, guess what? 10, 20 years later, when it's been used by millions of people, the side effects start to show up, the long-term effects start to show up. And that's why I really emphasize consciousness, because there are no side effects. Other than very good ones. Changing your consciousness. Yes.
Just wanted to mention that Sandra Halawi from England
Yes.
is fairly significant in EFT. She was invited to New York City last November to do a multi-day workshop, and she's actually planning to come out to the West Coast to do one here as well.
If you're on the EFT website, there's information about, because there are lots of seminars happening about EFT all the time. I might be able to come and do one again for you at some point in the future as well. Be late in the year because I'm totally booked. But I'd also look for people who probably teach it as well. You can get here and actually do a session with you. And if we have time, I'm going to be calling people out to the audience and actually working with you right here and illustrating the principles of it with you. It's very easy to learn. And there are also a lot of DVDs on the EFT website. And so from the Soul Medicine Institute website, there are links to EMDR, to EFT, to all the other energy psychology methods, associations, lists of practitioners. There are tons of resources on that site. It links out to all of these other places. Oh yeah, they jump on this bandwagon, yeah.
I just wanted to say, as a matter of interest, I just started reading a book that was supposed to be channeled from somebody from the other side, Abraham. He says almost identical what you were saying about consciousness and how if we're going to cure anything or do anything that we accomplish anything, we have to keep our mind on that higher level. We can't get off on, oh, this is terrible and I can't do this and that kind of thing.
It is remarkable as I travel and talk to people, the stories from therapists, from doctors, and from patients who have been healed from serious diseases sometimes, purely by consciousness. And it's a remarkable thing to me that people are able to do that. But again, it takes rigor. Like there's a video on my website, the Soul Medicine site, of a guy called Henry Hadley who had multiple sclerosis. He was in a wheelchair for several years, and then he began to use EFT. Oh, his big problem was that he fell down a hay chute when he was 14 years old, fell 25 feet on a concrete floor, landed on his sacrum. And he's had many back surgeries. I think his back's full of pins and rods. And so he was disabled, he was in a wheelchair and so on. And then he began working on his emotional stuff, which is pretty horrible. And he was rigorous in releasing all his emotional traumas. And on the video on my website, if you go to soulmedicineinstitute.org and click on the video, you'll see Henry Hadley at the age of 55 doing jumping jacks. And he's pain and depression free. So those kinds of miracles of people who do what that Abraham prescription is that's why I'm saying, be rigorous with yourself. Don't say, it's okay to be naughty to this person now. I got a really horrible boss, and it's okay to resent her. George Bush I love him. He's a wonderful spiritual teacher to millions of people. Yeah, whenever I hear him in my office, they say, they're talking about Bush or someone, I say, he's a spiritual teacher, So love George Bush. Love Ahmadinejad in Iran. Love Osama bin Laden. Sit there and just love these people. I don't know if it's helping them, but it's sure helping you.
Okay, thank you all for coming. See you next.
The body is just adaptive for the feast and famine period that hunters and gatherers live with for million years. And so that's why it's hard to burn fat. Because if you had to get through a winter every year, you don't want to have fat that disappears too fast. So this kind of solves that problem. So anyway, I think it's going to be a very big thing. So check it out. you know, as usual, what I'm telling you is just giving you a lead for your own exploration. And now with the internet, it's so easy to explore these things. It's just unbelievable how things have changed since Smart Life Forum got started, you know, 1992 and so forth. It's so much easier. Bill.
Just want to mention that New York Times, Jane Brody had a very good article on vitamin D on Tuesday. You can Google the New York Times and you can go to the article, and she it was a third of a page review, and she it's great to see her, who's been very conservative, finally say, yeah, it looks like vitamin D is the nutrient of the decade.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Yes, Stan.
Thank you. Remember I brought up the book on statin drugs and side effects by the astronaut Dwayne Grammer. Well, one evening, it was probably 11, 12 o'clock at night, I just got curious. I said, what if I wrote this guy a letter? Would he come out here? And I didn't expect any response. But about a week or so later, he did send me an email, and I forwarded it to everybody. That's the good news. He would come out. So there's always another side to a story, right? The bad news, we don't have any money to have him come out here. He would like to inform us about, you know, obviously all the dangers of statin drugs. But the other side of the coin is that he also has a great website and a newsletter that comes out, at least, I think it's my second newsletter that I got, called spacedoc.com. And maybe in the back of the book here. So you could subscribe to his newsletter, and you can see all the positive and the negative effects of the statin drugs. And it's free. Now, if we had enough money, we can get him to come out. And I wish we could get him to come, because it would be an eye-opener. Statin drugs, as you all know, is a major seller in this country. Yeah, major, billions and billions of dollars. And even though even in this book, he talks about, they knew a long time ago it's not about the cholesterol, it's about the inflammation that happens inside the body. But the statin drugs has dominated the mindset of the public, and the doctors, and everybody else. So please, if you have a chance, get this book called Statin Drugs Side Effects. Since we talked about this, there have been numerous articles appeared in other magazines. In the Townsend letter, you had a lot of discussion about statin drugs and the possibilities that it could cause the C thing, cancer. No definite proof of it yet. But they all talk about what could happen if you could take statin drugs. And there have been positive articles about it and negative articles, depending who you talk to. When this came out, about statin drugs in it was the Time magazine or whatever the magazine it was that came out. Then on a full-page ad, just to give you the power of these companies, there was these medical doctors for the pharmaceuticals that said that statin drugs have a positive benefit. And the other thing that I really recently found out, and I didn't realize it, the guy who developed the heart.
Jarvis.
Yeah, it talks about statin drugs and Lipitor on TV. He's not a medical doctor, but he looks like a medical doctor. I mean, you gotta people have to literally wake up. I'll put that to rest. But because statin drugs affects memory, and the reason why this astronaut got interested in it, because brilliant man, MD, space astronaut, all this other good stuff, something happened to his memory, and he couldn't figure out what was going on until he did the investigation. And part of the book, it says here, with maybe 15, 20 million, or maybe more people taking statin drugs, you may not want to be driving in front of them or behind them. They may not know what they're doing, and that's not a joke. And the serious part of it is that airline pilots and other things, willing to bet that a lot of those people are on some kind of a statin drug. With that, good luck.
Okay. Edgar.
Okay, general question. Want to know if anybody knows about reducing the amount of calcium in the arteries. I'm using presently zinc and I've been using L-arginine and D-ribose for well over a year, and I'm upwards of 20 grams a day of L-arginine. Apparently no beneficial results so far. So are there any techniques that might surface in this group? Oh, I take vitamin D a lot.
Yeah, you got to take excessive. You got to take about 25 to 50,000 units of vitamin D for 3 months. Absolutely no calcium with it. And also you should take a small amount of vitamin A with it, like 10,000 to 20,000. There's a lot of literature that vitamin A is synergistic to vitamin D. And also if you want, vitamin K2. But
I take that as well.
Yeah, but you got to do 25 to 50,000 units of vitamin D3. I had a same person I just, a year ago. That's how I met Joseph Prendergast about 2 or 3 years ago. We had a similar patient, and I was floored at what he was doing, and I invited him to dinner, and he told me his whole thing was 25 to 50,000 for 3 months, and then he's had amazing results. I spoke with John Campbell, and I told that to Mike today, that he referred me to somebody who did 25 to 50,000 a day for 3 to 6 months for somebody with that kind of condition, and it cleared up. Just make sure you don't take calcium, and the worst calcium is the carbonates. They get stuck in the body and they don't really eliminate very well. Citrate is probably your best form, but you don't need much of it. And magnesium you should take, because magnesium is a synergist to calcium. And also your parathyroid hormone controls all that. So vitamin D is very effective for the parathyroid hormone, right, Bill? And but you got to be careful with iodine, because iodine can throw off your thyroid dramatically. So you're better off monitoring your iodine levels in T3, because too much iodine is not good. You're better off with silica, just good silica, because silica also is a good synergist to magnesium and calcium, and throws calcium off out of the arteries.
Isn't silica completely inert?
Huh?
Isn't silica completely inert?
Yeah, it is. In France, there's a patent on the silica from a French scientist, and you should read their patents. You know who sells it? Jarrow Formulas. They have a very good one. And you'll read the patents on it. It's very impressive.
I saw Joe Prendergast a few weeks ago, and I had been on 5,000 D3 for a long time. Now I'm on 50,000.
Yeah, I'm amazed you didn't start you higher, because that's
he booted me up to 50,000.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think iodine's not such a problem, by the way, because if you do get too much iodine, you start to feel a little bit nervous, and you know you've got too much. So, if you meant.
Another thing, if all the things that you buy over the counter, if they don't work, chelation does. It may take a period of time, but chelation works nicely.
With C?
With chelation formulas, whether they're oral or not.
EDTA and stuff.
Yeah, there's good, and sometimes with calcium, you're holding it for lots of reasons, but it can be heavy metals. And so if you do a screen for heavy metals and it looks like possibly that's it, then you do a provocative test and use one of the chelators and check your urine to see if it's pulling out more metals, then chelation works well.
Yeah, that's what I should have thought of that when you asked me before. The basic chelator is like EDTA and some of that family. Right?
Yeah, but you see, you don't know how your gastrointestinal system is. That's the only problem with taking things orally. You don't know how your GI tract's doing. So if you can get your GI tract in shape, and you're so on the on plaque, then maybe it'll work nicely. You can use oral chelation with IV chelation, and that works even better.
And by the way, IV chelation is not something that's easy to find, and one of the best places to find it is at the Trace Healing Clinic, which is owned by Epigenetics. And she's on our board. We know her, so we trust her. So it's not a commercial, but it is hard to find. So I'm just trying to be helpful. I think Tim Guilford does chelation too. Some other people.
Also, Phil, there's one up on West Portal in the city.
Dan Dunphy.
Dan
Dan Dunphy does it.
Dan Dunphy in San Francisco.
Dr. Lopez, Joel Lopez is really good. He knows how to do this really well.
Okay.
He's in San Francisco.
Okay. Let me check this, gentleman.
I just didn't hear the original question of why you were, what was the condition
Okay.
to require
The condition is, Ed has calcium in his arteries. He's got angina since about a year ago. And his when he had the scan, his major arteries were okay, but his small arteries were not in good shape. So he still got the angina. So that's what we're trying to figure out what to do.
So that's why you would take the heavy dose of vitamin D.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, vitamin D is toxic if you take it long enough, if you take the heavy, big doses long enough. To get the information on that, go to John Cannell's website, which is vitamindconsult.com. And he has a marvelous discussion of large doses and how that works. You can take large doses for, 6 months, but if you take them for more than 6 months, you got to really start getting blood tests all the time, because you could easily start to throw your calcium metabolism off completely. Yeah.
I went to Dr. Pendergast also, and he recommended half gram of citrulline. It makes the arginine stay around longer. The other thing on angina, there's a treatment called EECP, which I'd like to find somewhere near here.
Oh, that's at El Camino Hospital.
He's doing it.
You're doing it?
I'm starting it tomorrow.
How much does it cost?
My insurance is covered.
Oh, okay. Well, it won't come with me, but
It's not that expensive, and the science is very good. EECP. You want to explain what it is?
well, it's enhanced external counter pulsation.
Right.
You get wrapped up in your legs and torso, or I guess just your legs, are wrapped in cuffs, and they basically pump the blood out of your legs back towards your heart. So your heart beats, and when it relaxes, they pump the blood back towards the heart. And what it does is it opens up collaterals in the heart, and I don't know what else it does, but it apparently is a major improvement in blood circulation. I think I saw on TV once there was like a football player, and he was wrapped up in this machine, and he was thumping around, and it was an EECP machine, and he was just using it to help with recovery from his getting beat up on the football field.
If anybody who's thinking about bypass, somebody in your family's thinking about it, you should definitely check out this as an alternative, because it's basically non-invasive in a way. And the science is really good. Whitaker recommends it, a lot of people recommend it.
I was wondering if anybody knows about MMS, Miracle Mineral Supplement.
Yes. It's the sulfur that works. DMSO is a byproduct of MSM. I worked with it with horses way back in the 70s, and I'll tell you, it's a sulfur.
MMS.
MSM.
MMS.
Different animal.
Oh,
Miracle.
I know, you mean the chlorine dioxide.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that. You're going to get a Hertzheimer. I used to do that about in the 80s it's good for hepatitis and malaria. You got to know how to use it correctly. It's you buy the cheapest sodium chloride and you mix it with either citric acid or lemon, and you have to know how to do it. The proportions are very good, but it does kill viruses, and it does kill malaria.
Yeah, very also on that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can take, a friend of mine has 2% bottles of hydrogen peroxide everywhere around his house, on the mantle, in the kitchen, in the bathroom. So he'll take a mouthful, squish it around till the bubbling stops, and makes a 2% out of a 35% food grade hydrogen peroxide. He's been doing it for 20 years. His name is Waves Forrest. So if you look under hydrogen peroxide or type that name in, you'll see papers that he's written on the subject. Very interesting. No, he's a layperson, but lay scientist. He studied this stuff for 25 years or more, and that's okay. As long as I have a microphone, I'd like to give a plug for our website for those of you that are new. It's www.smartlifeforum.org, and on there you'll see some videos, and then you'll see a listing of what will be tonight, my 78th video of Smart Life Forum.
Okay, well, I think we better go to the short reports here now, and let's see, Don? Oh, Don's not here. Now, did Don talk to the people who were at the conference? Today?
Well, let's see. Yes, he did. Vern Friedlander was one of them. I was.
You got to get Audrey.
And Audrey's husband.
Okay. Well, okay, now, Audrey, would you like to just take a couple minutes and say what you thought was most impressive?
The whole thing was impressive. I went through a report. I'd really rather compare something than.
Oh, okay. He didn't call you about that, huh?
No.
He was supposed to, okay.
Yeah, nobody called.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay, well, I'm surprised, because Dan is super consistent. I don't know, I hope he's all right. Because he talked to me just about 3 or 4 days ago and said, this is what we're going to do. I said, fine.
I just don't like to talk off the cuff, because
Yeah.
there was so much that was quite incredible.
What was the number one thing that just knocked you out?
There was no one great thing, just, Braverman, of course.
This is A4M, right?
Braverman, of course, I love Braverman.
We can't hear.
Braverman. We're selling his books down here. That Audrey and Michael just donated these books to Smart Life Forum. They're $25, $30 books. We're selling them for $10. So it's 15 we're selling. Sorry, 15. Yeah. By the way, thank you for buying supplements. And there's a lot of great supplements left. So on the break and stuff, keep buying them because we make enough money. We'll bring Gravelon out here to talk about statins. Yes, Ed.
Speaking about the conferences, I understand that it's a possibility of Smart Life Forum members getting a discount to the orthomolecular health medicine.
Okay, good. Okay, well now, let's see. Michael, do you feel spontaneous here?
I think it's fair if we wanted to give a report that we have a little preparation time because it is a 5-day conference plus there's 3 days before and a couple of days after for the professionals. So it's a very, very highly professional, highly scientific conference. There is every hour there is a different presentation and then there's side rooms with breakout presentations and forums. It would be completely unfair to do this off the cuff. I agree with Audrey because there's it is just really difficult to say what is important or what is the best because there's so many directions. I would say overall though, the A4M conference it's not cheap and it's very extremely interesting. And the best scientists, I would say, or the best doctors and medical researchers in the field come together every year and present their latest research, breakthroughs, findings over the year. But there's also motivational speakers. Susan Summers was there this year, Susan Summer with an impressive motivational speech. And so there's the whole spectrum. Ron Paul was there, Congressman Ron Paul. There was so much, and we could make a synopsis or we could just summarize a little bit, but it would take, for me now that it's 2 months ago, I would like to go back to the program and see, who was there and what did they say and what are the highlights.
Yeah, well, we'll try to do it in a couple of months again.
Yeah, that would be fine if we have a little preparation time, no problem. We go every year, we've been going for 15 years, and it's really, really interesting. We learn tons of stuff. There's also an exhibition with it, a huge exhibition room, which is a lot of fun, but also you get a tendency, I would say the predominant thing in the exhibitions was there's all kinds of, this year particularly, there were lots and lots of companies coming out with light, using light for healing, all kinds of instruments more or less with, laser light and pulsing light and, all kinds of light-oriented instruments. Lots and lots of exhibitors there. That was probably the dominant feature, other than all the things that are there every year that get better all the time. So if we have a little time, we could prepare something. It would be a joy to present that.
Okay, great. Okay.
But to do it off the cuff and from memory is unfair because then you go home and say, oh my God, I should have remembered this, and there was this, and there was this. And there's so much stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to mention one thing, and that's not about A4M, but just a very lighter note. I'd like to refer you to a website called intentionalchocolate.com. And it's a chocolate that has actually been prayed over and meditated on by the by Tibetan monks. And they did a double-blind study and found that the people who took in the intentional chocolate had improved well-being, higher levels of happiness, and more positive outlook than a control group that did not, that took a regular chocolate and thought that they were taking intentional chocolate. So the intentional chocolate actually proved itself, and you take chocolate 3 times a day. So, and there's, you know, the positive benefits of dark chocolate, with the, you know.
Call me in the morning.
So anyway.
Where do we sign up for this study? Does insurance pay for it?
Just for the record, I have to be the usual bad guy and say I don't believe it. But you know, who did this study? The intentional chocolate company, no doubt. You know, but I mean, you know, I just don't believe it. Go ahead.
Actually, did anyone see the movie What the Bleep? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a number of the scientists who were in What the Bleep were behind the study. Okay.
But I'll tell you one thing, chocolate, whether it's prayed over or not, is dynamite. It's really good for you. And they know exactly why. I mean, you know, it's polyphenols. In fact, interesting thing that just came out is that what's the same thing that's in red wine. We thought maybe that red wine was so good for your heart, you know, because of the resveratrol. Well, it turns out there's not that much resveratrol in red wine. What's really in the red wine that's good for you is a tannin family substance, which I have a hard time pronouncing it, but it's Procyanidin, which is procyan. No, it's not procyanidin. It's procyanidin. That's it. That's what it is. And there's a tremendous English researcher who's got a tremendous video. I sent it out to the board. Did you guys see that? It was dynamite. And
that's what it's in pine bark. It's the same thing.
yeah, pine bark and grapeseed.
Ern was at the show. And
No, I wasn't. I snuck in.
But he has a few comments on these.
Good. You want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just mention some interesting things I heard over there. I was there mostly to work on my machine, but Ron Klatz asked me to come over with the new technology, and he was interested in for the next A forum for me to present something on frequency and the RNA, but we'll talk there. What really got me was I learned a few things that was very interesting. The whole thing on the anti-aging thing was, a lot was talked about sirtuin and resveratrol, okay, and telomeres. So, but one thing that there's a new technology out there. It's very expensive. So I don't know if you want to do it. The TA company is doing a study on which they got Jerome Biotech company involved. They're using a form of astragalus. Astragalus is a compound found, you know, for energy, and we used it with athletes in way back for, you know, like a adaptogen.
It's a nerve, right?
Yeah. And they're using they're synthesizing astragalus to make this telomeres grow longer. And they're charging something like what? Yeah. I'll do it for nothing. I'll tell you how to do that. But no, it's very expensive. But here's what was, they were selling these bottles of formulas, right, in that booth. And I said, you know that you have something in there called resveratrol in your multivitamin? He says, yes. And I gave him a website to go in there to do research on resveratrol, because resveratrol has the opposite effect. It actually shortens telomeres. So that next day I came back, he went into the website and reviewed 1,000 literatures. He started giving away the multivitamin. So if you wanted multivitamin, he was giving it away to everybody. He says, now we can't use it because you're right. Sirtuin, resveratrol, which stimulates sirtuin, but also has an effect which shortens telomeres. So you can't do that. So now they're...
You can't do what? You can't take resveratrol?
No, you can't take resveratrol if you're going to lengthen the telomeres. And it's in the literature.
Because look, the goal is to lengthen your life.
Yeah,
to
but
lengthen your
doing
telomeres.
this,
We know that resveratrol lengthens your life.
Yeah.
There's tons of science. So don't tell me that therefore, all we know now is that maybe the length of the telomere doesn't correlate with longevity.
Yeah, no, that could be it, but they actually went in the website, and they came back and says, you're absolutely right. I gave them the website, I gave them and then there was a scientist there who was from France. He was there walking around. He's doing telomeres research in France. He went up to them and showed them his papers. He pulled out papers saying that resveratrol has an antagonistic effect on the telomeres, which I'll bring that information to you so you can see it. But the thing is also that in order for resveratrol to work, guess how you have to do it? You can't take it in capsules. You have to drink it with wine or vodka. You have to take it in it's in the literature. If you want to improve the resveratrol function with sirtuin, you really have to take it with alcohol. It won't work. That was the other problem why they removed the capsules from the product. Yeah.
That's absolute nonsense. I can show you the science. We can have a debate. I'll bring in my articles. I mean, they had a tremendous summary of the resveratrol research in a recent issue of Life Extension magazine, and it has nothing to do with the alcohol content.
No. They found, if you go into Group Carsagua right now, you'll find the government study on PubMed. Go into pubmed.gov, resveratrol effectiveness bioavailability. It is bioavailable is increased by drinking wine with the capsule resveratrol.
Well, it may be increased, but the thing is, it's not necessary. And a minute ago, you were trying to suggest that we shouldn't even take it because it's...
No, I'm saying the study on telomeres, which this company did. They found the research correlating that resveratrol actually has an antagonistic effect.
I understand, but you were saying, therefore, the guy decided it was worthless and gave away all his vitamin pills.
Yeah.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
I'll give you his name.
Okay,
He's the president
but this is a forum, so I just speak my mind. Burns certainly speaks his mind, so you guys can research it for yourself. But anybody who wants to know, where I get my research, I'll be glad to provide it.
Okay, sorry to prick your balloon, but look, if resveratrol and red wine reduce the mortality due to heart disease, this is a very big effect. If it also shortens the telomere, this is a smaller effect. So what you have is you have two lines crossing. You have decreased mortality from resveratrol for heart disease. You have increased mortality because you're shortening the telomere. And there will always be a crossover point somewhere.
A little washout.
And at the moment, the odds are stacked very heavily that you're going to die of heart disease in this society in America.
Right.
So you can't be so sure about the science because you don't know where the devil the crossover point is.
Well, you can be sure about it in the sense that people who typically die at 75 to 80, who take resveratrol, and other animals too, even fish benefit from resveratrol. I mean, they did all kinds of animal research with resveratrol. The fish don't take it with wine.
I eat the grapes and let them ferment naturally, so I eliminate the middleman. I also heard and looked at some studies that shows that resveratrol also has a very short half-life in the body. And there is some problems with bioavailability with many of the forms that we're taking resveratrol. And that the doses that we do take have to be almost astronomical. And there are some real problems keeping resveratrol around in the tissue for very long. Would you agree, concur with that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's why I'm saying go into the government's research. It's right there. I'm not lying. I'll be glad to bring the papers next time.
Okay, bring them.
It's the government's research on it.
Remind me, and I'll bring the other stuff.
And doctor, you know who spoke on it? David Permuter. I had a half an hour he asked me to go out with him and have some coffee, and we sat and spoke for a half an hour. The guy's one of the top leading researchers on this area. And what did he say? There's another compound that he talked about at the conference that is more effective than resveratrol. He's holding off on that one.
Oh, that's one of these mystery. That's one of these mystery
but
sources.
he's got
Here
the
we go
data.
again.
You saw him talk about resveratrol and how he said there's another compound coming out that's much more effective than resveratrol. Yeah.
Well, there's lots of good things, but you know, it depends on the individual. And you can hear anything you want to about a product. And if you feel good taking a product, then it's working for you. But if you don't, even though the science says it's good for humans, it's not good for you. So you really have to listen to your body and think about what you're doing. And the research is good, but my goodness, don't get so caught up in it if something is working for you.
Okay. Hey, Stan.
Good, Max.
I have a simple idea. Just cut the baby in half.
At this point, I don't even know what the baby is. Okay, I think maybe at this point, does anybody want to bring up one more thing before we take a break? Yeah.
Vitamin A. I don't know how true this is, but remember Dr. Scott Mumby? He lectured here. He was over a house, stayed over a house for that weekend. And he said, you know, before antibiotics, that when people got the flu, they would take approximately 50,000 units of vitamin A every day. And if they would think they were just getting the flu, it would not get the flu. If they got the flu, then it would diminish the effects of the flu. Well, we've been around a lot of kids, a grandson, and everything else that had the flu. So far, knock on wood, we popped the 50,000 units of vitamin A, and it works. I don't know why it works. I don't know, maybe someone can explain that to me, but...
Epithelial tissue in the cells, in the immune system.
Yeah. That's a cheap thing. I think 50,000, a little bottle like this is, I don't know, maybe $10. So you don't have to go through all these sophisticated things on your body. You do very simple things. And what Dr. Mumby reminded me is that some of the stuff that we knew worked got buried. It's all nothing new. It's all there. It's been there before, but we forgot about it. So just remind yourself, 50,000 units of vitamin A, you feel you're getting a cold, high probability it won't happen. And this flu that's going around, it's pretty devastating. Some people have been 4 to 6 weeks on it.
Yeah, okay, let me just make one comment. You know, the old conventional view was that since vitamin A and vitamin D were fat soluble, they were stored in the body, and if you took large doses every day, you'd soon, reach a toxic condition. So the conventional view was you should take, 400 to 600 IUs of vitamin D and a larger amount of vitamin A. Well, it turns out, of course, that vitamin D is stored by the body very well and handled by the body very well. So the toxicity issue is not very great with vitamin D, unless, of course, you really get beyond the physiological dose. Remember, when you're out in the sun in the summertime, you make 15,000 units of vitamin D a day or something like that. Isn't that right, Phil?
Yeah, if you're young.
Yeah. So obviously the body can handle 15,000 units a day. But here's my point. Vitamin A toxicity is a separate issue. Vitamin A is much more toxic than vitamin D. And you got to be extremely careful with it. We know vitamin D works for viruses, especially for lung infections. But I would be very careful about vitamin A. So anyway, let's take a break now, and then we'll come back and we'll have our main speaker. And I've talked with him, and I can already tell he's a very charming gentleman, and he's certainly an accomplished author. So we look forward to a good evening. But now, will my salespeople man the posts? Okay. And we've made about $400 or $500 so far, so let's finish it off now.